So a lot of people have been asking what's going on with TikTok, what's going on with TikTok. So this podcast is to help address those questions and also address a legal opinion that just came down from the Federal Court of Appeals today. I went over the opinion, so I'll break down that opinion too and be able to go over that in this podcast. So I'll give just kind of a brief rundown on the background on what's been going on. So Congress, and before that, it was an executive order from the president, and then later Congress, bipartisan effort, passed a law essentially banning TikTok and saying you have by January 19th, 2025. So as of right now, today, when I'm giving this podcast, that is almost less than a month away. They have to sell the business to a third party. But there is an exception in the law, which is a little strange, where if the president agrees, if there's a pending sale going on and they need more time to finalize that sale, then the president can give a 90-day extension to me, which sounds really weird, the president getting involved in a business transaction. So let's break down what happened. So the Federal Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. came down with this decision, and it really is a weird decision. And so first we got to talk about First Amendment, because it's a First Amendment issue. So they said that this violates the First Amendment, and they wanted an injunction on the law, banning the law, saying this law is unconstitutional based off First Amendment grounds. And so when it comes to the First Amendment, most judges, this is where both sides of the aisle usually come together and hold hands. And this is one of the few times when you see legal decisions come out from the Supreme Court where they are all lined in a row, and it's a 9-0 decision saying that, yes, this violates the First Amendment. And First Amendment, very important in the United States. We covet it. We know the importance of free exchange of ideas. We understand it. We covet it. We understand how well it works for our economy. And I can see how well it works for our economy. I think it is the greatest societal invention, period. The First Amendment. I think the greatest invention was the most important invention was the Gutenberg press, which I believe, in my mind, is what started this huge revolution in technology. The exchange of ideas, not having to reinvent the wheel, being able to bounce ideas off other people. Christopher Columbus said he read Marco Polo's writings on going down the Silk Road into China. He made him think, what's a faster way? So the writings, Marco Polo, was important. So, and it's just exacerbating and getting faster and faster now with the internet, even in just the past 20 years, like medical journals. So much research can be so much more easier to access than it was in the past. And then we have China and Russia in Iran, where they restrict a lot of free speech. A lot of people go to jail for saying negative things about the government, about the company, or about the country. And so that's why we protect it so much. And that's why it's so important. And we're very, very concerned, and we look at a very hard eye on whether or not there's a First Amendment violation. And usually if the First Amendment is implicated, then it's a very high standard. It's called strict scrutiny. And a law that violates the First Amendment almost always never survives strict scrutiny. And that is very, very important today. And this decision is a little scary because of that. So basically what you have to do to survive strict scrutiny. So this is under the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. If it's a state violating the the First Amendment. If it's the federal government, then it's just under the First Amendment. And so what you look at is, first, there's different levels of scrutiny. So they look at whether or not it's content specific. If they're specifically targeting a specific group of people and their speech, or a specific media, or like if people are protesting that you can't have cats anymore, if there's some kind of law that was passed, no more cats, and people were protesting it, and they passed a law to curtail the cat protesters, that would be content specific, and strict scrutiny would apply. And so what's going on in this opinion is let me go through this standard again. So for strict scrutiny, you have to apply a compelling government interest that is narrowly tailored to that government interest. And when it comes to the First Amendment, I mean, there's a very, very compelling reason for free speech. And so it has to be above that free speech. There has to be a reason more important than free speech, which, again, is hard, compelling reason to say, oh, yeah, this is more important than infringing on people's free speech. So that's kind of the groundwork of the test. And the Court of Appeals is wrestling on whether or not strict scrutiny should apply, or intermediate scrutiny. So it's a little bit lesser. You just have to prove, instead of compelling, it just has to be an important. And it has to be, instead of narrowly tailored to that interest, it has to be just reasonably related. So that's kind of the groundwork. And let's go through what happened here. So the Court of Appeals, it's a very weird opinion, because they don't flat out say this is intermediate scrutiny and it doesn't survive intermediate scrutiny. They left to it. It's weird. They didn't flat out say. They just said it survives. It says it survives the scrutiny, but they say we're not going to say what scrutiny it is, but it survives. But then they essentially say too that it survives strict scrutiny. So that is scary. And why is that scary? Because it's a precedent. It's a hole in the First Amendment. It's a basis that can be used down the road to justify violating free speech. So that's very, very concerning. But also, we're going to go through both sides of the stories too. We're going to go through the government side, we're going to go through the people's side, and we're going to talk about maybe some possible other legal issues that there could exist too. But also, so from what I understand, I mean, I didn't look a whole lot at the opinion. I understand it was TikTok that sued, and the company from the Cayman Islands. It's technically in the Cayman Islands, but it's pretty much run in China. But then there's also there's a California-based subsidiary in California too. So they all sued. And from what I understand, it seems like a group of an organization that represents maybe TikTok users sued too. I'm not sure. But that's important too, because I think that's a different, from a First Amendment standpoint, I think there's a completely different analysis on whether or not it's violating TikTok's First Amendment rights and whether or not it's violating the TikTok users' First Amendment rights. And I would say that users, way more issues there than TikTok's First Amendment rights. And we can talk about that. So government. So, I mean, yeah, maybe a lot of us have thought what's the big deal? I mean, you go on TikTok and you see TikTok live, and it's just kind of fun to watch if you've ever done it, just going through the live feed and seeing, you see people playing video games. There's lots of people playing video games. There's people just sitting there in their bed. There's people washing dishes. Some people are just sewing, and some people are playing music. I mean, it's kind of just like a virtual hangout spot. The TikTok Live. There's a bunch of videos, people opening Pokemon cards. So, I mean, a lot of people are just like, what's the big deal? Who cares if China is watching people sleep and people play video games? Like, what kind of information are they going to get off that that's going to be really important? But, okay. I mean, that's kind of the TikTok argument. Like, this is ridiculous, and it really is. These are American people have these accounts. These are American people with their accounts. Maybe on the back end it's run by China, but there's American people are running the show. They have their followers and everything, and but now we go to the government side. So on the government side, so the biggest concern I see on the government side is, for example, if I am in the military and I have TikTok on my phone and I go into my military base, technically, I guess, you don't know what TikTok's doing on the back end. They don't know what kind of data they're getting off your phone. You don't know if they have the ability to turn on your microphone, and if that microphone is on, and if they can pull voice data. But I mean, very least they probably have location data, and so they know where you are, and that's important, and that is an issue. So that is a problem. Is technically China is our adversary, and maybe people might take offense to technically, but that's another issue for another day. But if someone is, if you have government officials that have TikTok in their pocket and they're walking around, location very least could be an issue. If they're taking videos, and even if they don't post those videos to TikTok, but TikTok, the app, probably has access to those videos, and they could go through and see those videos, that's an issue, especially if there's video of confidential, private conversations that American public shouldn't know about. So that's the thing, is that's the biggest concern I have, is federal people having TikTok. But there have been laws, and the United States federal government, and I think state governments too, have passed laws and rules and agency rules and regulations and policies saying that you can't have TikTok on your phone, or you can't have TikTok well on duty. You can't be using TikTok. You can't have it on a phone. You can't have it on a government phone. You can't have a government computer. So I mean, the only downside to that is maybe that rule regulates at the workplace, but maybe they go home and it's at home, and maybe they're maybe just knowing where a military person is at all times could be detrimental. And if they go home and they get on TikTok at home on their home phone, that could be an issue. And I don't know if the government even has the right to regulate what people can do in the comforts of their home. So that's the government issue that they're grappling with. And so is it justified or not? I mean, a lot of us aren't too savvy on the back end of cybersecurity. A lot of us aren't too savvy of really the war that is going on in the cyber world, and the cyber information that's taking, and how important that information is. I mean, a lot of us just aren't in the know. We aren't intelligent officers. We don't work for the CIA. We don't work for the FBI, and so we're just not in the know of what's going on, big picture. I just heard that the biggest cyber attack in the nation's history happened yesterday, but us as the lay people, we have no idea how big of a deal that is. And I mean, they happen all the time so much now. I think most of us are just kind of like, day in the dollar kind of thing. Like, happens all the time. And so, yeah, maybe we just have thicker skin and smaller brains when it comes to really what's going on in the cyber world, and how big of an issue this is. So, so that's the government's argument. So let me tell you about the issue that I have with the government's argument, though. They teach you this in law school, I think, usually, but back during World War II, there was a law slash order that was passed that said we're going to take all Japanese people and we're going to, this sucks. We're going to take all Japanese people and we're going to put them in camps based off your race. As a civil rights attorney, that sucks. Sucks to think about that. Man. So that, you can see from my emotions, that was probably one of the most terrible decisions. And I mean, in the World War II era, you can understand that, a war's going on and you've got to figure out friend from foe. And, civil rights essentially didn't exist. Back then, we still were in the separate but equal Plessy v. Ferguson stage. But still, there were laws that said equal protection. That still would have been, in my mind, a big equal protection issue. But so the way the government justified that was national security. They said that in light of national security, you can put these Japanese people, these Japanese Americans that may have had nothing to do with this, had lived in America. They were American, except they just looked Japanese and they had a Japanese descent, but they had no affiliation with Japan. So, so they justified it by saying that based off national security, we can do that. So that's my concern. National security. This is in the name of national security that they're doing this, and there's a lot of bogus things that the government has done in light of national security too, like the Patriot Act that came out after 9/11. We had some whistleblowers that came out. Edward Snowden, he said that essentially the government is stepping way over their bounds and they're using this like candy, and they're using this to pretty much spy on Americans without probable cause. Violating First Amendment rights, no warrants, no probable cause, being able to get intel on all of us without a justification. And he blew the whistle on that. And so, yeah, that was a big deal. But the law was passed in light of national security. So I can see abuse of power in this. I can see how national security can be used for bogus issues. And so I'm not necessarily saying that, hey, I'm thinking big picture. I'm thinking not specifically TikTok. I'm thinking how this decision can affect future situations that may water down the First Amendment. Because if we have more decisions, like, so is the Japanese case, Kyoto case, if we have more Kyotos coming now in 2024, that's a problem. And seeing there are very, very few cases that we have that have survived strict scrutiny. So to have this one come in, that it's more ammo to use down the road in another situation to say that, well, we were doing this in light of national security. And I take issue with that. I'm scared of that. And so what's going to happen now? So the Washington Federal Court of Appeals, they pretty much, I mean, the way they wrote their opinion, they just said, "No, we're not going to deal with this. This is a Supreme Court issue." I mean, in my mind, they didn't. I can't even understand. Like they said, we're not going to make a decision on strict scrutiny, what scrutiny applies, and it sounded like they just punted it, and so now it's on the steps of the Supreme Court. So what's going to happen? So this opinion was issued today. So what's going to happen now is TikTok and all the people that sued are going to file a petition for certiorari review to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court, what happens is, I mean, they don't take on every single case that comes on their footstep. They can decide whether to take one up or not. And they usually just look at the huge ramifications of the case and how it can have lasting effects nationwide or if it's just, really just specific to that case and really won't affect anyone. If it's really just specific to that case, doesn't really affect anyone else, then they won't take it up. So they kind of do like an internal review. They do a vote on whether or not they'll take it up. And I mean, this one, I mean, if it's strict scrutiny and also because of how big of a deal this is it's one of the biggest companies in the world now, thanks to the United States. And so I think this is something that they are going to have to take up. So what what just TikTok is asking for is just saying that it's unconstitutional and to bar this from moving forward. So we'll see what they say on that. But also the thing is, TikTok and all the people suing haven't been able to get it's called a temporary injunction. So just kind of hey, let's pause this law until we take a look at everything. So there's nothing like that in place right now. There's no pause in the law that says that that would keep anything from happening January 19th. So technically they still have to divest by January 19th. And, the Supreme Court of Appeals are very, very slow. And so the Supreme Court, I mean, these parties are going to have to file their petition for review, and then the Supreme Court's going to vote, and then they're going to issue a decision and say we're going to grant certiorari or we're going to deny it. If they deny it, then the D.C. Court of Appeals decision stands, and that's it. And TikTok can't be in the United States anymore. If they take it up, I guess technically they could relook at a temporary injunction and see if they can issue a temporary injunction. So that's going to be a weird scenario. And so TikTok is kind of in a catch-22 here, because the Supreme Court will grant certiorari, and then usually they just give dates. They say, okay, these are the briefing dates. You're going to give this party's going to give their brief, opposing party's going to give their brief, and that takes months to brief it. And so nothing can be done by the end of January unless somehow they grant some kind of like expeditious review. But I doubt that would happen, especially I don't think the judges are going to want this to ruin their holidays. And so then come back from the holiday and we have 19 days. So it's going to be strange to see what happens. But technically, I guess there could be something that could pause it. Or, I mean, I guess TikTok could sell to an American company. But I mean, if I was TikTok, I would fight it. I mean, why would I want to give up this cash cow? And I don't think TikTok either, because the United States is the cash cow and they're making most of their money off us. TikTok doesn't even exist in China. They have a different social media platform. Then, yeah, I don't think they would just say, okay, fine, we're just not going to do the United States. We'll do it in the other countries. Like, I think Canada has banned it. I don't know how many European countries have banned it. If it's not in China, I don't know how, I don't know if it's latched on in India or not, if India is a cash cow. I assume. So, I mean, they're going to lose, like, it's going to be essentially worthless to move forward if they can't get the United States in. So if I was their attorneys, I would fight this and not just say, okay, well, let's just sell to an American company. So I'm just going to talk about now too some other issues that I see. So let's talk about a little like a hypothetical. So under the First Amendment. So say that a Chinese company had a newspaper company and they decided to create like a subsidiary, and so they take a little branch and they put it in Los Angeles and they create a Chinese Los Angeles newspaper. And then the government comes out and they pass a law and they say they same thing as TikTok. They ban you, say you have to sell it or you're out of here. I would say that there's no way that would happen. That is a freedom of press violation, strict scrutiny. I mean, if they're throwing out propaganda, deal with it. It is what it is, and freedom of speech is more important. If somebody wants to throw out Chinese propaganda, then that's free speech. That's important. You have to hear both sides of the story. The problem is the government coming in and cherry picking the topic, even if it's Chinese propaganda. Chinese propaganda has First Amendment rights. It's not. First Amendment isn't choosy on race, on religion, on the topic. It is across the board, applies to everyone. So I would say that, yeah, that is a huge First Amendment violation. You can't do that. So with TikTok, it's a little bit different because then the question is that comparable to, is TikTok comparable to a newspaper company? And I guess so on one end you could say yes, but the problem is that it's different. And the problem that, and they note this in their opinion, is that on the back end, you have no idea what's going on with that algorithm. So one thing is like, there's someone who I've seen on TikTok. He gives updates all the time on the war in Ukraine, and he has hundreds of followers, and you follow the metrics, and statistically his views should be about the same based off the followers he has. But for whatever reason, a couple weeks ago or a month ago, he said that my views aren't getting as, like, I'm not getting any views on my videos, on my Ukraine video updates. And so he had issues that he was getting shadow banned, and I think a lot of people started liking it and forwarded it, and I think finally he got away from getting shadow banned. So that's the issue too, is, I mean, yes, China, I have no idea what it's like to live in China. I have no idea how a Chinese person thinks, and just having that mindset of, I can't say anything bad against the government. I can't say anything negative about the government. Me living in America, to me, that sounds insane. That sounds like torture and oppression. But I mean, in China, that's what they've grown up with. That's what they know. And I don't know what their thoughts are. I'm sure maybe they just might have they're just used to it per se. And but yeah, me knowing, again, one of the greatest social inventions ever, to me it's so oppressive. And so yeah, but you have this China guru where they are very good about suppressing speech, and they have done a very good job. They call it the Chinese firewall of China, on how they have been able to regulate their people in the United States, or I'm sorry, in China, in China, and like 1.2 billion people, and they're able to regulate their speech, and they're able to keep tabs on what people are saying, and be able to manipulate the what's being said, and being able to get their narrative in, and have their narrative go through. But I'll just say that, the United States does that too, and the United States is good at that too. And I just learned that the Chinese vaccine came out in the Philippines, and the federal government actually did a smear campaign on that in the Philippines, and telling Filipinos that the vaccine isn't that good, and that there's issues with the vaccine. And I'm sure that happened here in the United States too, on issues with Chinese vaccine, and that was just specifically to get people to use the American vaccines. So, I mean, talking about propaganda too, I mean, there's not just Chinese propaganda. People need to understand there's also American propaganda, and also, so I mean, and there's a specific people and companies, people that monitor Google and Facebook and Twitter, and obviously there are agendas there too. There's narratives there too, and they can push narratives and subtly send messages to you on what you should hear, and subconsciously change your opinion about things. And so that's a real thing. And I mean, Google is liberal, and so Google there is definitely huge evidence of liberal bias of Google trying to give you liberal things, and liberal media, instead of conservative media, and hearing both sides. And so that's an issue within our country too. So having a China pull the strings on the on what can and can't be said, that's a big issue. And so that's something to think about too, is that and that's what the government had issues about, is they can control the algorithm, and they can say, hey, we are going to allow these types of channels that we like to get more views, and these people that we don't like, that are more anti-China, anti-sentiment, we're not going to allow them to get a lot of views. So that's a problem too. So they're distorting it. So with a newspaper, you can't technically do that. I mean, you just have to write articles and send it out, and I mean, people can read it, and so it's different than a newspaper company. So I don't know if that would apply to, if that same scenario would apply with a newspaper company in China, or with these people. So, but the other thing too, the other problem that I see, and I mentioned this at the very beginning, is the people who who have channels. There's tons of people who have created a huge following on TikTok, and a lot of them are kind of like mini news sources. And the positive that I see is that, before this, we only had these national, local news people, and to tell us what is going on in the world, and it's kind of democratized and spread out news. These TikToks and so these people are using TikTok. I mean, I guess TikTok is kind of like their channel. You tune in to TikTok to get your news from Joe. You follow Joe, and you like how he gives the news and the updates. And so that's the other issue too with the First Amendment is it's not just the strict scrutiny apply when you're violating TikTok's First Amendment rights. Is you are pulling the plug on Joe. Joe could have 20 million viewers, and you are pulling the plug on Joe. That, to me, is the big issue that I see, is that it is like pulling the plug on millions and millions of news outlets and just them going blank. And I mean, the argument could be like, okay, well, you can go onto Twitter, you can go onto YouTube Shorts, but it's not the same. And you don't have the same followers now. Like they took away your followers. Like, how are the followers going to know where you are now? How are you going to gain the same followers? And I don't think that's an easy fix. So I think the bigger First Amendment issue is pulling the plug on Americans' TikToks. And so, when we talk about narrowly tailoring, we talked about how this compelling government interest can be narrowly tailored. One question is, is there another way that this can be regulated? Like if we're concerned about the algorithm, like I say, and controlling the narrative on who gets views, on who doesn't get views, like, is there a way where we can send somebody in and ensure that the algorithm is not being controlled? But I guess what I take issue with that too is like, if for whatever reason we have like we hire a government official to go in and monitoring the algorithm or whatever, like, who's to say that guy isn't gonna make narratives for the U.S. government and send U.S. government propaganda? Yeah, but I think that maybe they should explore different ways where TikTok can still exist, but there's some kind of monitoring on the algorithm. I think that would be a narrowly tailored reason where TikTok could exist. So yeah, but yeah, I think that the problem too is that because of how it's affecting, like I mentioned, how it's pulling the plug on Americans, I think that is a blatant First Amendment violation, and that's an issue. And even though and so I think one problem is this DC Court of Appeals didn't, because I believe that there's parties that are just TikTok users that are in this lawsuit too. I don't think they properly analyzed their rights either, and I think their rights are way different than TikTok's rights.